All right, folks, welcome to my presentation of the Tabernacle. Like we've seen before in the studies in the Pentateuch, there were those who could not accept the biblical account, and Julius Wellhausen, he's one of those figures who accepted the documentary hypothesis, and along with that, he denies Moses as the author. So as a result, he thinks Exodus was written much later, and so the tabernacle, according to him, did not happen. Part of the reason of his claims is when he reads 1 Kings 7:13 and sees that Solomon needed help to build the temple, he automatically assumes that because that was the case, there's no way the Israelites could have built the tabernacle. Later on, you have Menahem Heron, who agrees with this type of thinking and carries on this type of work in his book, Temples and Temple Service in Ancient Israel. Basically, what he says is, if you accept historical reality, there's no way that the tabernacle could have been built by the Israelites. The tabernacle was made to last. It was made from acacia wood for strength and rigidity. The supports and the altar, the table were all made from this wood. The acacia tree was very durable, and it was able to grow in hot, dry climates. The first picture you have there, the acacia tree is growing in the wilderness of the Sinai region. There would be trees like this all over, and the Israelites could have had access to the trees like these. The tree was very hard, it was very strong, and it's more stronger than oak and ideal for making furniture. It could withstand weather damage, insects couldn't hurt it at all, so this is the ideal choice for them. According to Exodus 25, verse 1-9, the items needed for construction of the tabernacle was contributed by the Israelites, who gave so much material that Moses decreed in Exodus 36 to stop bringing anything more. There were a large number of people in the Israelite camp that came from Egypt, as recorded in Exodus 12, that tells us 600,000 Israelites. With that many people giving what they could, if they did not have the material like gold and copper for bronze, they could find it where they were at. The wilderness, especially in the mountainous areas, were filled with copper and gold, as was Egypt, who used gold in the building of sacred objects. To say the Israelites had no access to copper or gold, that was unlikely, because even today there are many mines for extracting precious metals in the area. Exodus chapter 25 gives us the idea of the importance of the metals, given that the list of the materials were organized according to importance. First was gold, then silver, then bronze. And of course, when you look at the construction of the tabernacle, that is the case where almost everything is encased in gold. The ark was constructed with acacia wood, like I mentioned before. The dimensions were 2 cubits and a half long and a half a cubit wide. A cubit was roughly 18 inches. The height of the ark was half a cubit high. In terms of our own imperial measurements, it is 45 inches long by 27 inches wide by 27 inches high. The ark was covered in gold of the highest quality that gave it a look of a solid object. The design of the objects was not for artistic reasons, but they were to remind the people this was the presence of God where he dwelled among them. The ark was, as well as the 2 altars and the table of bread, all meant to and designed to be transported. What you did was you put these staffs and these rings mounted on the corners, and you could carry them without even coming in contact with them. Inside the ark contained the testimony that was given to Moses, which is from Exodus chapter 25, verse 16. But that was not the only thing that was inside the ark. Hebrews 9:4 states that the golden pot of manna and Aaron's rod was also inside. The covering of the ark was decorated with two chairs facing each other. This is significant because it had the imagery of the throne of God from Psalms chapter 80, verse 1. And in Exodus 26:31, the cherubim marks the veil that separates the most holy place from the holy place. The next object is the table of bread, which is this one here. The table of bread was made out of acacia wood with the dimensions of 36 inches by 18 inches wide by 27 inches high. The table of bread was placed in the holy place, which was set with bread by the priest and eaten by the priest. The table had the function of the fellowship of God in the tabernacle. The bread was offered to God and would be placed on the table for 7 days, and then would be eaten by Aaron and the priest. The finest quality of frankincense was poured onto the 2 piles of 6 loaves of bread. Frankincense was made from the resin of the Genus boswellia tree, which is common in South Arabia and northern Somalia. This, of course, brings us into the region of the Sinai Peninsula. The smell of frankincense was very pleasing to those of the ancient Near East and was used for worship. So it was very common to find frankincense around the area. On the table, there were 4 containers. There were plates, dishes, a pitcher, and bowls. The plates were used for holding food. The dishes were like a pan, which was used for keeping the frankincense as a reminder of offering, found in Leviticus chapter 24, verse 7. The pitcher was used for holding a liquid for drink offering. Now, because this is nothing ordinary, this is considered something special, it's obvious that they would have used wine. The bread and wine had the idea of God being near his people who comes to bless them. The number of objects has a connection with creation because the manna on the table was collected for 6 days except on the Sabbath. God did not give bread on the Sabbath, but the bread was placed on the table for the Sabbath. Our next object is the lampstand. This was in the holy place to provide light for the priest doing work. The lampstand was the only object in the holy place that was not made from acacia wood, but it did have some solid weight to it as it was made from solid gold. Roughly it was 66 pounds. The lampstand was very decorative, with 1 branch in the center and 3 branches on each side. If you'll notice, there are 6 lights, 3 on each side, and the 7th light is in the center, which is called the Sabbath light. The lamp was filled by the best olive oil as found in Leviticus chapter 24, verse 2. And it was made so that the light would never go out, which was refueled every day. The suggested symbolism behind the lampstand is various. There's quite a few ideas that the scholars come up with, but the idea that seems to express its function in the lampstand was a sign of God's presence among his people, and the light reminds the people that God constantly watches over them. Our next object of holiness is the altar of incense. This was made from acacia wood and cast in gold with the dimensions of 18 inches long, 18 inches wide, and 36 inches high. This is the highest of all the objects in the holy place. There's some similarity between the 2 altars. If you will notice, on the altar of the burnt offerings and on the altar of incense, both have horns on the corners. You see, they're small, but you can see in there that they're raised there and they're raised here. And it's not that the horns They were actually horns, but the Hebrew word is used in the text describes what they look like. The altar of burnt offerings and the altar of incense go together, where the altar of burnt offerings was to offer up animal sacrifice, and the incense altar was to offer a sweet, pleasing smell to God. The incense was no ordinary incense, but it was specially made for use on the altar of incense. It was made from a perfumer who was specially trained in making incense used in sacrifices in the ancient world. It was possible a perfumer was in the Israelite camp. So you can't really suggest that, 600,000 people, that there's no chance of there being a perfumer among any of them. Incense being offered to God was nothing new for the Israelites, as Noah offered incense to God in Genesis chapter 8, verse 21. The offering of incense symbolizes that an offering was being made on the altar of burnt offerings, and it was pleasing to God. This was a sign of atoning grace, so that one who offered the sin sacrifice had assurance that the sacrifice was pleasing to God. Aaron the high priest alone had the task of burning incense for the sacrifice. The schedule of incense offerings mirrored the schedule of burnt offerings, so that both were done together. On the Day of Atonement, after blood was sprinkled on the ark, it was also sprinkled on the horns of the altar of incense and the altar of burnt offerings. Our next object is the bronze altar. The bronze altar was made from acacia wood with the dimensions of 90 inches wide by 90 inches long by 54 inches high. This was the largest of the objects in the tabernacle area. This altar was cast in bronze for high heat resistance. Bronze was an alloy made with other metals to give it a high temperature melting point. The altar was a box-like dimension with a grating on it. Some will argue that the grating was a step for the priest due to the height of the altar. This seems to be an unlucky function. The bronze grating seems to be more likely a function of holding the wood on the sacrifice while the sacrifice burned. There were other tools connected to the altar that were also cast in bronze. There was a bronze pot for ashes, a shovel, basin for liquid, and fork for assisting in burning the fat, and pans for holding the coal. Burnt offerings were common in the tabernacle sacrificial system, which was performed morning and evening and also on holy days, found in Numbers chapter 20 to 29. The offering really didn't have a beginning and an end, but there was a continual burning day and night. Our last object here, which is our sixth object, is the bronze basin. This has no dimensions for its size, but it was made entirely out of bronze. It had the function of ritual cleansing for the priest, and there was a sense of purification that goes on in the tabernacle, that one must be clean before approaching the holiness of God. Although these objects may be different and have different purpose, they do have one thing in common, and that is all of them have been anointed with oil and consecrated for a specific purpose, which is to offer sacrifices to God. Now the tabernacle. This is an image of the tabernacle that I found. I feel that it's quite helpful in showing what the layout would be like. Sacrifices here were done one of two ways. Either the high priest would offer the sacrifice for the entire encampment, or an individual would make a sin offering. The sin offering had the preferred practice of offering a domestic animal such as cattle, sheep, goats if they could be afforded. Now, if you are poor, well, there's options. You could use turtle doves or pigeons. And we find that according to Leviticus chapter 1, verse 14, chapter 5, verse 7, chapter 12, verse 8, and chapter 14, verse 22. The animals used in the sacrifice had to be male with no defects, and would often accompany a grain offering and a drink offering. The Israelites would gather the sacrifice and head for the entrance of the tent of meeting, where they would be met by a priest guarding the entrance. So the priest would be somewhere around the outside here, maybe on the inside. And so you come in, do the sacrifice, and you would lay your hands on the head. And what that was to do was to show that this animal was to take your place, so that when they were sacrificed, the sins would transfer. There were two roles to be played out in the sacrifice. The first role of the Israelite, which has to do with the unclean things, like killing the sacrifice, cleaning, and chopping. The second role was done by the priest, who would be the intermediary between the Israelite and God. The Israelite would kill the sacrifice as recorded in Leviticus chapter 1, verse 5 and verse 11. Then the priest would take the blood in a basin and toss it against the altar. The Israelite would cut the carcass in pieces and place them on the altar. The priest would burn the head and the fat, while the Israelite would wash the legs and the entrails, as recorded in Leviticus chapter 1, verse 9 and 13. The skin was not burned, but it was given to the priest as payment for his work, recorded in Leviticus chapter 7, verse 8. The priest would guide the Israelite through the process and make sure that nothing that was forbidden was done, such as going into the holy place or even the most holy place, where it was strictly forbidden that no priest would go in and look, touch, or approach at any object of holiness with the penalty of death. So the altar kind of serves, there's kind of a line there that that you don't really cross. This is the diagram of the tabernacle according to its layout, where the dimensions forms two squares, and at the center of each square a sacred object of holiness. The first square you have the altar of burnt offerings, and you see this is at the center. This is where the sin sacrifice is done. And at the center of the other square, you have the Ark of the Covenant. So in a sense, you have the atonement of sins and the atonement of the entire camp. Now, the priestly garments are very important to the tabernacle, and I include them in the presentation because you need to show how everything fits together. The priestly garments were designed in a way to reflect their role in the tabernacle, and it would change depending on what they were doing and where they went. The high priest wore garments that reflected the holy objects which came into contact. There were 8 priestly garments, and 4 of them were shared between the high priest and the ordinary priest. The first garment was the ephod. The ephod is this apron-looking object here. It was tied around the back and was held in place by 2 stones with the names of 6 tribes engraved on each stone, representing the 12 tribes of Israel. The garment was a mixture of wool with other linens and a dominant color scheme of gold, blue, purple, and red. The gold in the fabric reflects the gold in the tabernacle of the objects of holiness. The second garment is a breastpiece, and it's this piece right here. It was designed with gold and combined with other fabrics. The breastpiece had 12 stones on it and was set into the garment. This is reflected in the Hebrew where it says the stones for setting. On each stone, a name was engraved of a tribe of Israel. The breastpiece was held in place by 3 sets of rings and 2 chains, all in gold and blue lace. The third garment was the ephod robe. And it's this piece here that the high priest wears. This is made from wool thread, and the color was blue. Attached to the robe was golden bells at the bottom. This is so that one could follow the high priest where he was going to the tabernacle. Between each bell was a pomegranate made from wool and linen. Now, the reason for the bells is when you start burning incense and with the smoke that it gives off, sometimes you don't know where people are going, and so you don't want to trip over things. So they would follow the priest with the bells. The fourth garment was the diadem made out of gold that rested around the turban of the high priest. That is this piece right here. On the diadem was inscribed, "Holy to Yahweh." The diadem was a crown which connects the high priest with the gold objects of holiness, because on each gold object there was a gold crown attached to them. The fifth garment was common to the high priest and the ordinary priest, and that was the tunic. This is the tunic right here. You can see it's all in white. While both the high priest and the ordinary priest both wore a tunic, it should be noted that the high priest had one that was more elaborate and was made from checkered material, as recorded in Exodus 28, verse 4. The ordinary priest wore one that was made from plain fabric, found in Exodus 39, verse 27. The sixth garment was the sash or girdle around the waist, and it was made from purple, blue, and scarlet linens. Aaron's sash had similar colors to the outer veil of the tabernacle. The ordinary priest's garments realistically reflect the outer linens of the courtyard. Aaron's garments were different than the ordinary priest because Aaron, as high priest, was to work inside the tabernacle in the 2 holy places. The seventh garment was a head covering worn by both ordinary priest and the high priest. The main difference between the turban of the high priest and the ordinary priest is the crown the high priest wears. The turban was not like what people wear in the Middle East today, but it was more like a cap that could be taken off at the end of the day. The turban was a sign of dignity, which the common people in the camp would not have worn for their everyday clothes. This garment, like all the others, shows that nothing is ordinary, not the clothes or duties of the priest, but all was consecrated to come before the holiness of God. The eighth garment was a linen that covers the nakedness of the priest. This is worn by both ordinary priest and high priest so that when they were to leave the tabernacle, they could remove the priestly wear and not be naked. The later development was to leave the garments in a chamber near the holy place. There are 3 categories of garments that the priest would wear in the tabernacle. This designates who does what, where, and when. The 3 categories are the holy place, Aaron's garments, and priestly service. The garments were not ordinary clothes, and I don't think that you would find Aaron going in public parading himself around and everything that he was to wear. These were special clothes that were only for priestly duties. This was common in the ancient Near East, where you would have those who do priestly work. While they were doing duties, they would wear these clothes. The Egyptians followed this practice where they would wear special garments for priestly functions. In Scripture also we see the angels are recorded as having special garments, which is quite above the ordinary wear. So this is my presentation. It's come to a close, and I hope you enjoyed it and learned quite a bit. Thank you.